Anyone who does home improvement projects or builds furniture needs a good table saw. And this is a great table saw. It's affordable, it's powerful, and it's accurate. But to get the best out of this saw, you have to tune it up first. And let me go over the basic parts and show you how to tune it up to get the best results. Number one, select the right blade. And this comes with a great carbide tip combination blade. That means it's good for rip cuts and cross cuts. We'll show you those in a minute. But first, what you need to do is make sure that the table saw is tuned up the right way. And to do that, unplug the saw. Never touch a blade with the machine plugged in. And what I have is a very accurate combination square. This is a 18-incher. And what I'm going to do is bring it up to the front edge of the table, put the square against it, bring the blade around, and set the blade flat on the metal edge of the square. Bring up a Sharpie marker, lay in a line, just like that. I'll bring it around to the other side, lay in a line. And you'll see why this is really important in just a second. So, first thing on a table saw, you use it to cross cut. Cuts made across the grain. Now, how do you make that cut accurate? Very simply by flipping your miter gauge over, putting it in the miter slot, the miter bar goes in the slot, releasing the miter lock, putting the front face of the miter gauge square to the front of the table, locking it in, and now I flip that over, and when it comes time to do accurate cross cuts, I know everything will be square to the blade. I simply use a good 6-inch square, put it flat on the blade, and indeed that's perfect. Now that's a great way to go. Now, let me show you how to set up for rip cuts. We've already established that this is square to the blade, the flat of the blade. And what I'll do is I'll bring the rip fence up here, and I'll bring the rip fence over to the edge of the miter slot. The rip fence face is flush to the edge of the miter slot here, and it's exactly the same way on the back. And what that means is this is parallel to the miter slot, so the fence is set up the right way to give accurate rip cuts because it's flat and parallel to the plane of the blade. And that's really important. Now, if it was out left or right in any way, I simply use a wrench here and here. On these bolts, loosen it slightly, adjust this fence left or right until it is absolutely on line with the miter gauge slot, and tighten it back down. And that's how you tune up the rip fence to get accurate rip cuts. Now, I'll move this out of the way, and those are the basic tune-up things that you need to do for the miter gauge and the rip fence, the two key functions on a table saw. But look at this. This whole mechanism is tied into a trunnion assembly that the motor will tilt on. If I release this lock right here, watch what happens to the blade. I can do bevel cuts now, okay? And with a miter gauge, I could actually tilt the miter gauge, and just like on the miter saw, I can do compound cuts where I have compound angles for crown molding, for example. But what we need to do today is adjust this so this blade is absolutely square and locked into position for all the cuts we'll make on the project. Okay, now that blade is square to the table and the blade. I'll lock the trunnion assembly in position. I don't want to see any daylight along the edge of the square for this. Make sure it's securely locked. And now that gives me all the accuracy I need to do our work. Now, I'll lower the blade, and remember this, whenever you're cutting on work pieces, you want the top of the blade, the top tooth of this excellent carbide tip blade, to be no more than 1/4 of an inch above the surface of the work piece that you're working on. And if there is one thing I'm passionate about, it's using the guard system on table saws and the splitter with the anti-kickback fingers. Now, a kickback is simply a board that kicks back towards you because it gets into a bind. That's all it is. So avoid that and use a guard with the splitter to stop the board from pinching on the blade. That's really important. That splitter is there to help you do good work and keep it safe. So that's A to Z on a table saw. And really what we need to do is make some cuts. One other final thing, this support extension gives a lot more support when you're working with long stock or cutting down plywood. Now, it's time to get to work, plug in the tool, get the safety glasses on, and make those rip cuts. The miter gauge is used in the miter slot to cross-cut boards and small panels. The miter gauge is adjustable from many angles and could be used to saw miter joints with precision. Dado blades can be used to cut grooves and dados. Dado blades are stacked blades locked onto the arbor to make wider cuts. The table saw also can be configured to cut specialty joints, including finger joints, tenons, half-lap joints, or dental details.